Welcome back to the Maverick Webinar series, where I come on here and I get to shoot the shit with you about some of the issues that are affecting agriculture right now, and also going through some of our blogs and some of our writing and some of the stuff we talk about on the Truth About Ag podcast to bring it down to a more technical level from a consulting standpoint. So, again, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell if you're on YouTube. And from our perspective, look into Maverick Ag. So we have launched Maverick Ag 2.0 coming this fall. Keep your eyes open for it. We're doing some large scale changes to how we're doing our consulting and what's available to not only our current clients, but also to those clients who might not think that CFO work and financial work are in their repertoire, but they actually want to look into it. So keep that in the back of your mind post harvest. The other one, please look at farmercoach.ca. Our coaching gets launched again in November, some new cohorts on the executive program, as well as we're launching a master's program for those that have built the legacy of the farm and are looking for that next sense of purpose in the industry, looking beyond operations and beyond financial and more at what they can do to actually leave a better industry for their kids. And then also the foundations program, which is for our young farmers, which I'll be pushing very heavily through my speaking this fall and this spring, because it gets you involved. That next generation, you get to see some of the aspects we talk about on the daily, as well as some of the aspects that the successor in your farm has probably gone through. And whether they've involved you or not, we are going to give you a crash course, 1-day course of all those information sessions. So what I want to talk to today, one of my favorite topics, I'm going to call it transition. And I call it transition, not succession, because I believe the word transition fits it better because it's a business standpoint. From our standpoint, whether it's a family farm, whether it's a construction company in Toronto, whether it's a small business outside my door here in Saskatoon, it's all a transition of the business. Doesn't matter if it's family members, doesn't matter if it's non-family members. And as the ag industry grows and as the ag industry gets bigger dollar values and less kids are coming back to the farm, I think you're going to have to take it into the effect that it's not just a family business anymore. It actually might have to have third-party leadership and CFOs and fractional COOs, that kind of stuff. So I call it transition. So that's what today's is going to be on. It's going to be on how we see transition for, agriculture and primary producer farms, because the average age of a farmer is well over 60 now, and it's going to happen more and more. And as current commodity markets are where they are and things get tighter and risks get higher, I think you're going to see a lot of exits and a lot of consolidation in the industry. So I'm going to give you a little bit of our method on transition. So that's what you get to look forward to today. So where I'm starting, the biggest thing I find about transition is the people, the processes, and the compensation. And what I mean by that is, in order to have a positive experience when it comes to transition, and it doesn't matter what business you have to have those three. And by people, I'm talking communication. Without communication, no succession, transition, whatever you want to call it, plan occurs. And by that standard, communication isn't just on the once a year meetings. It's daily, it's weekly. I mean, from our standpoint on our farm, our leadership group is in two totally different locations, yet we meet once a week, and that gets drilled down after that meeting to another meeting with our office and our operations staff. Full transparency, full communication. This is the journey we're going through. And you've heard Christian say it many times, is his job is just to give us the destination, dig the ditches, and take the rocks out of the way. So from our standpoint, we need to drive that down to the culture, and communication is step one. So on small family farms or larger scale family farms that are in the middle of a transition, communication becomes very peril. And this is usually where the biggest failures begin, because the older generation doesn't allow the younger generation the transparency they require, or they don't train them, or they don't give them the experiences, or they just don't include them. And I've seen a lot of transitions go sideways because the young generation has stepped in, and let's say they're 40, 45, 50, and something happens to dad and he's gone and they've never made a decision yet. And I've seen this way too many times. Now, on the other side, I've also seen where in the Farmer Coach program, I've had a 17-year-old sit in the Farmer Coach program because his dad felt that he wanted him to get some exposure to that side of agriculture, to the entrepreneurial side, to the leadership side. So there's both ends of the spectrum, and I've seen them both. It's just that in Western Canada, I think about 14% was the 2021 census for how many succession plans are in place. So from that standpoint, it's not happening enough. And the first step is communication. Now, moving forward, second step, processes. And what I mean by that is, and I've talked about it before, but the big one is dad goes, gets his degree, and maybe he's an agronomist, or maybe it's, biology, science, whatever it might be. Maybe it's mechanics. Well, we have this bad trait in agriculture where if dad did this, I should do the same. So the kids go in and they get a mechanics degree just like dad, or they get an agronomy degree just like dad. Well, the problem is that no other business, whether agriculture or non-ag, do you need two experts in the same role? So this is where a lot of transition problems fail, is that son comes back, they've got the same specialty as dad, they fight over the same role, they fight over the same decision making, and nobody has any power or expertise in other areas that the farm might need. So a lot of the questions I ask guys when I do transition plans is more revolved around, is your son coming back or daughter coming back to be CEO? Because if they're coming back to be CEO, there's no reason for an agronomy degree or a mechanic degree. Let's be serious. The numbers on a farm dictate that business is probably one of the biggest risks right now. So if we're talking from a business standpoint, they need an ag business, or they need a commerce or an accounting or a finance or something revolving around the actual CEO side of the business. Now, I'm going to get a lot of kickback on this and a lot of pushback, because there's a lot of farms that believe that they've got those experiences and they're still farm CEOs. But to be fair, there's 189,000 farms in Canada. 18,000 of them are about over $1 million worth of revenue, which makes them actually a full-time farm without off-farm income. And of that, only 5% of Canadians are entrepreneurs. So that means 5% of that 18,000, which is about 900 farms. So 900 farms have a true CEO that is a visionary entrepreneur, wants to build the business, looks at other aspects, treats it like other industries. That is a very low percentage. So out of 189,900 farms actually have a true CEO. Now, that's not saying I haven't seen huge success with farmers taking the reins, whether they're not educated in that side of the business, but they are just that kind of strong people. The problem is it's few and far between. That's why we talk a lot about the top 5 and the bottom 95. It's not the top 30 and the bottom 6 or bottom 70. There is a very distinct gap between the top 5%, which hence 5% entrepreneurs kind of rolls, and the bottom 95%. And it's not just profitability, it's operations, it's logistics, it's growth, it's the way they go towards decision making. So I think that's a big one to remember, is just on the processes side. It is very important that everybody has their own unique abilities. And that, I mean, that's a strategic coach terminology that I'm stealing from to give you right now. But I had to go through coach 4 times a year for numerous years to figure out what my unique ability was. And guess what? It's not driving equipment. For me, it was the financial, it was building, it was implementing. So I've utilized that strength in my position in this business. So not only that, but Christian and our other partners have given me that position because that is where I should be fit. And it's based on my education. It's based on my experiences. So you got to keep that in mind. Just because their blood does not mean that they fit the role of CEO. And I'm starting to get more and more farms that son is coming back or daughter's coming back, and they're not coming back to be CEO, and nor do they want to be. The amount of complex decision making, the stress, the amount of large scale decisions that we're making as farmers every day have actually scared off the next generation. And so the ones that do come back, they may or may not want to be leaders in this industry, but they may or may not still love the lifestyle and love the industry. So I'm starting to do more and more work with farms about finding external leadership for their farm. Even though the kids are still coming back and want to be on the farm, they've got a different role. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you look at Cargill, you look at Walmart, the family members aren't actually working in the business. They're just owners. And the ones that are working in the business may not be CEO. So you have to have those discussions as a family, especially on the transition side. And then the last part, and I mean, this one's kind of comical, but it's the compensation side. So when I was in public accounting, we always used to use the terminology that the goal was so that you could all sit down for Christmas together, right? Which means that the family gets along and there's no rifts, there's no, animosity. I have trouble with that because in my eyes, and I'm a bit more right wing and I'm a bit more business minded. If you're bankrupt, Christmas still sucks. And I'm sorry that that's pretty blunt, but it's true. So from that standpoint, I still believe compensation is one of the most important aspects of transition, is having a clear compensation and a clear journey, not just for today or for the next year. It's for the next 30 years. It's the wills, the estates, the fairness versus equitable, all those discussions. that compensation has to be in place, or all the rest don't matter. And I mean, from a compensation standpoint, this is another hard discussion, because I mean, what is somebody worth? What is it worth for a family member to come back and create the legacy on the farm? From our standpoint, it doesn't matter. From our standpoint, it's totally based on the aspects of a business partner. So for me, if I'm bringing on a partner at Maverick and it's family or non-family, I look at three things. I look at time, brains, and money. And those are the three things that in any business partner, any merger, or any acquisition you look for. So what I mean by time is labor. Are they coming back to put in a whole bunch of labor, which is going to free me up to make significant returns in other aspects of the business? Because that is a benefit. I mean, we do a lot of our hiring based on that is you hire, you delegate, gives you more time, makes you more return. That's how our employees become investments and not costs. But then you also got to look at it from a different aspect of brains. Are you bringing in someone with massive amount of experience? Do they have an education? Did your son or daughter go out and get a commerce degree? And are they taking CEO training? Are they entrepreneurs? Are they leaders? Are they visionaries? All of these questions lead to a value for the farm. So you got to make sure that that is also something your business partner can bring, is brains. And that creates a return for the farm. So again, another great business partner that provides return. And the third one is money. And time, brains, and money is a very easy thing to come off the tongue, but money literally relates to land or equity, and land, equity, or cash. And from that standpoint, not many young farmers coming back to the farm have those assets in place. So the money aspect is more for the retiring successor part of the operation, but it's still there. If I'm looking for a business partner and maybe someone's buying into Maverick or buying into HGV, yeah, money matters, and they need to get paid and compensated for that. So that's how we build our compensation. We call it the equity calculator. It's part of the Maverick Consulting, and you'll see some of what we're launching in the fall. We'll give access to many people for this type of template. But what it's doing is it's breaking down how you earn from a compensation standpoint. Now, why is this important? Because if you're not bringing any of those three items, I don't want you to be a business partner. And that doesn't matter if you're my son, my daughter, my dad. Everybody in a business has to have one of those three items in order to be compensated or be worth bringing back. And what we do on a lot of transitions with agriculture, especially primary producer farms, is we don't look at those aspects. We just bring them back and we give them a quarter. And here, you can learn how to farm on this quarter. Well, you just gave him a $500,000 piece of land and you gave it to him for free. And he's going to grow a good crop, and he's probably getting compensated on all the equipment. You're not charging him, and all of a sudden, oh, farming's easy. Well, that's not how we all learned. Most of us, when we stepped into the farm, it wasn't doing well, or we got told to go to university because there wasn't any money in farming. That's what led to some of the operations today. And you can say it's because of the real estate, and a lot of it is, but a lot of it's also the fact that we came through the 80s and we started agriculture when it wasn't sexy and it wasn't profitable, and we built our farms. There's something to be said about, that self-awareness that we built it. And they don't get that if you do the transition the wrong way. So from this standpoint, in my eyes, they're probably coming in as a labor, because unless they've gone and got an education and then come back, the brains part isn't there. So they're coming in as a labor. So you got to decide, what's that labor worth? Are they running a combine? Because that's a $25, $35 an hour job. And that's what you compensate them. And if that's not enough for them to live, they're going to need off-farm income, or maybe that will distinguish whether they come back at all. Now, from their aspect, how do they make more money? How do they get paid more so they can give up their off-farm job, or so they can come back full-time? Well, they either work harder, put in more hours, more labor, or they get educated and they come back and they start taking responsibilities off your plate. That's the motivation. You want them to figure out that their own compensation is in their own hands. If they come back experienced, motivated, they work hard, they take responsibilities, they grow, the trajectory on their career is huge. Yeah, they're going to make enough that maybe they don't need an off-farm income anymore. But you've dictated that, and they've had to work hard for that. That there's something to be said about that. Now, on the equity side, the hope is that once they get the time and the brains and they start taking more and more of the risk, they buy into some land, or they start throwing some equity back. And now guess what? You're paying them a 5% return on their equity, or whatever the percent, return you think is for your equity and theirs. And you're paying them a rent, because every quarter should have a rent on your operating company. If you're not paying yourself land rent, you're just lying to yourself. Your operations are showing a huge profit, and maybe it's just the real estate. So those are the three big aspects. And then obviously from the retiring standpoint on the compensation, I don't ever want to see a farm give up a retirement just for the legacy. And I see it done way too much. And the reason I say that is that, yes, there's something to be said about the legacy of the farm, but if you have to give up your retirement for it, the business wasn't built to be multi-generational. And it's a hard pill to swallow for some. And I get why they do it. And if they do it, I end up doing the consulting and I stay on because that's what they chose. They chose to take a discount on their retirement in order for the legacy. But in my aspect and my true belief, I don't believe that should be done. So what I believe should be done is that the successor is paid for his land. So he gets paid a fair rent on his acres that he owns. And he's paid a 5% return on his equity because he's essentially investing in the next generation instead of selling the farm to him and taking his money and investing somewhere else. And I mean, let's be serious. Agriculture is a great investment right now. If you keep the land, the appreciation is pretty high. You get a return on your assets. Yeah, maybe it's only a 1 or 2% return, but honestly, holding the real estate over the last 5 years, you made considerably more than any market. So there's benefit to the successor for leaving his money in and allowing the next generation to utilize him as the bank. But then there's also benefit for the next generation coming in that they take on more responsibilities. They learn to reinvest because the more they reinvest, they get paid 5% on their equity and they get paid rent on their land. And it's a big circle on the compensation side. And it's very important that for both sides to actually utilize that because it sticks as close to you can as fair. Now, the last aspect that we got to talk about is the non-farming siblings. And I've heard a whole bunch of podcasts lately. I listened to probably too many. And I've heard the term fair and equitable should not be the same. And I solely disagree with that. And you're right. The numbers today, the real estate's massively high and you can't use life insurance to equalize anymore. There's a lot of reasons that you can use that excuse. But the big one is if the real estate's split off from the operating company, a succession with non-farming siblings where it's fair is quite easy. And from that standpoint, I mean, I've done quite a few, is that the real estate company gets split and the shares get split between the three individuals with a long-term lease in the company. Each person gets a dividend of the rent each single year. The other thing it does is it avoids the large check phenomenon that we have, where if you got to sell off and the kids get a $3 million check, I promise you it's going towards material items. And no family wants that. Even if they're selling the farm legacy to leave money to their kids, they don't want to see it go into material items. They want to see it go into their livelihood, their kids, their enjoyment. So what I found is by doing the real estate companies and paying out dividends over a long term, the checks are big, but they're not big enough that they can just squander. They're big enough that maybe they pay down the mortgage. Maybe they allow them to go on 3 or 4 trips a year. Maybe they allow them to get the kids that nice hockey stick, whatever it might be. But everybody gets paid fair and equitable. And if there's some equity in the operating company that's still sitting with dad and mom, maybe there's life insurance there just to cover that. You don't have to cover the real estate. You got to cover the opco because the last thing you want is leaving shares to non-farming siblings of an opco because that just hurts the farm. And those long-term leases in there, they're good for, let's call it 10 to 15 years, gives the farming child 10 to 15 years to figure out how to buy out the rest. And in some areas, maybe they won't have to buy out the rest. Maybe the rest want to continue with the dividend because it's a great investment. But if they do want a bigger check and they want to sell a few quarters or sell a few shares of the real estate co back to the son or daughter, great. You got 15 years to plan for that. If you can't plan for it in 15 years, then that's on you. So the parents have done everything correctly on the fair and equitable scale. They leave the responsibility up to the remaining farming child to figure out how to get the runway in place. So that's about the 30,000 foot level of how we treat transition. And don't get me wrong, guys, there's going to be emotional conversations. I've never had a transition that doesn't. The big one for me is that before I actually take on a transition engagement, I ask the questions. And the questions are, whether they're checklists, whether they're actual questions on a Zoom or on a in-person meeting, it's based around, are you actually ready for the transition? Because if it's emotional, you're not ready for the transition. If it's emotional, you are not ready for the business discussions and the business side that is transition. And that's where there's a lot of experts out there, and I solely push you to use them. I mean, we know a lot of them. I don't want to plug one over the other right now because honestly, I haven't used them enough to give you a fair, adequate who's the best. But from my standpoint, that's where their skills are. Their skills are getting you ready for transition, not actually getting you through the actual transition itself. because transition is a business discussion. It's a boardroom. Emotions in the boardroom is where I see a lot of companies fail. And the funny part is most of those companies most of those companies that get through transition without emotion are non-agriculture. The family farm we've put on this pedestal and we've made it so tied to family and lifestyle that it's hard to get around the emotions. And the farms that can get around the emotional side and do a fair transition, they come out the other side still spending Christmas together because compensation's there, processes are there, the people are there, the communication's there, everything is tied into it. So whether you agree or disagree with me, keep that top of mind. Leave, as I said, like, share, comment, leave questions. If you got questions on this can be done on 3 or 4 different webinars because there's so many aspects of transition to cover. But just keep it out there that the stuff we're saying, I've seen work with clients, and it's been very progressive, and it's done with some of the most progressive farms in Canada. So utilize some of these things. If you like the template, if you like the discussion on the templates and stuff, keep your eyes open for Maverick when we make changes in the fall, as well as Farmer Coach. You learn about all the stuff I'm talking about just on a deeper level with a whole bunch of other farms in the room. So that's Evan Shout, Maverick Ag Webinar Series, signing off for another one. Talk to you later.